What's going on, y'all? This is our third lecture in Unit 5 about cognition. We spent 2 lectures talking about memory. We're now moving on to a different part of cognition, which is thinking. We're going to talk about how we solve problems, creativity, and things that can go wrong with our thinking. Okay? So what we're doing here is metacognition. Metacognition. Cognition means thinking. Meta means the big picture. So what we're doing here is we're thinking about our thinking. Okay, so here's a word you've seen before. A schema is how you expect things to be, whereas a script is how you expect people to act. If I ask you to think about a kindergarten classroom, I'm asking you about your schema. How do you picture the classroom? What do you picture to be on the walls? What's on the floor? What colors do you see? Right? How are the desks and tables set up? That's you visualizing your schema. Now, if I ask you what you expect a kindergarten teacher to be like, I'm asking about a person, how they might talk, what they might wear. That's you thinking about a script. It's your mental idea of how you expect people to act. Okay. So if I tell you that I have a friend who's a kindergarten teacher and he's 300 pounds, has a beard, tattoos, and drives a motorcycle, that might challenge your script for what you expect about a kindergarten teacher. Okay. If I tell you about a different friend who teaches a kindergarten class and all of the class is outside, that challenges your schema, how you expect things to be, okay? So when you picture a word, a concept, an idea, what you're really doing is forming a prototype. It's a mental image that represents the best example. Aristotle said that the way that we go through life is by thinking about prototypes. For example, when I say the word tree, you probably picture something that looks like this. Right? In your mind, you visualize a tree with like a trunk and branches and a big bushy top, okay? I've never seen a tree in real life that looks like that, but that's our prototype for a tree, right? This is technically also a tree. It violates a lot of things about a tree schema that we might have, right? This is the kind of tree that only shows up around holidays. It lives inside, and it's just a weird tree, right? Similarly, when I say bird, close your eyes, picture a bird. I bet you picture something that looks kind of like this. You probably don't picture something like this guy. Is he a bird? Yeah, but it's not your typical prototype. It's not your schema for what you think of when you think about bird. So your brain is interesting. Let's talk about how your brain can solve problems. So the first way to solve problems is trial and error. Let's try a lot of different solutions and maybe hopefully one of them will eventually work. Okay. Now there's other things you can do. Sometimes we have what's called insight, where all of a sudden an answer comes to you. We talked about this in our last unit. Wolfgang Kohler is the guy who came up with this idea. He talked about the light bulb moment, the eureka moment, the aha moment. I'll show you all some videos in class about how for animals even, they can have insight where they're solving a problem and all of a sudden the answer just comes to them. Okay. There's been some really cool research. You don't need to write this down, but really cool research on insight. What they found is that your brain actually starts to light up and go crazy about a quarter of a second before you actually think of the solution. There's literally a moment in your brain where you haven't come up with the answer yet, but your brain knows it's coming. That's really cool. That's the insight moment. So there's a famous chimpanzee that Wolfgang Kohler worked with, Sultan, the chimpanzee, where all of a sudden Sultan would just solve a problem. He'd figure out, in this example, he was trying to get this banana up here, and there are boxes around here, and he realized he could stack the boxes to get to the fruit. I'll show you a few different examples in class. So trial and error, insight, just kind of hoping the answer comes to you. A third way to solve a problem is called an algorithm. Please put a star by this point. An algorithm, that word kind of reminds me of the word algebra. It is a very mathy way of doing things. It's when you have like a formula where you are guaranteed to try every single possible solution. So imagine you're trying to like break into someone's phone, okay? And like it requires a 4-digit password. An algorithm would be like you going 0000. Nope, that didn't work. 0001, 0002, 0003, all the way through. Eventually, if the phone doesn't lock you out, eventually, would you get to the right answer? Yes. That's the problem with an algorithm. It takes a long time. It's not practical. A heuristic, put a star by this word too, Go ahead and say the word heuristic. Heuristic, that's fun. The ST in heuristic reminds me of the word shortcut. STC, STC, shortcut, heuristic. It's a strategy when you maybe come up with a way that you might get a quicker answer. It's not guaranteed to work, but at least like you won't be trying every possible solution. So if I ask you to maybe unlock somebody's phone and has a 4-digit passcode, what might be a heuristic you could use? Well, maybe use their birthday, maybe try their address, maybe do 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe do like 1, 3, 6, 9, right? Some people like to do the corners, right? Heuristics are shortcuts that may or may not work, but will definitely save you time if they do work. So quick check for understanding. We'll talk about this in class. I have 3 examples here. Imagine that you're trying to unscramble this word. Imagine you're trying to find something in the grocery store. Imagine you're trying to define a vocabulary word in a textbook. What would be an example of solving these problems with trial and error, insight, an algorithm, and a heuristic? So pause it, see if you can kind of think through the situations. We'll talk about them in class next week. Another check for understanding for you, just to make sure some of these are throwback to our previous lecture on memory. And some of these we just went over, but make sure that you can answer these questions. Number 6 is your opinion. So I mentioned heuristics or shortcuts. There's 2 main types of shortcuts. The first heuristic is called the availability heuristic. Available in your mind. That's the key word here. And you might want to write the word pop. Pops into mind is an expression they've used on the AP exam a lot. So what's the most recent thing you just saw? Or what's the most vivid example of this, right? The news sometimes tries to give a very vivid example. They never say boring good things, right? I don't know if y'all can read this or not. 7 billion people continue to live. 50,000 flights safely take off and land. New cures for illnesses being invented every day. Kittens. That's not what sells. What the news tries to do is make things really vivid and graphic because they want things to pop into your mind later on, all right? Here's an example that they commonly give. Are there more words in the English language that begin with the letter K or have K as their 3rd letter? Well, what people typically try to do is they start trying to think of words that start with K or words that have K with the 3rd letter. Guess what? It's way easier to come up with. It's easier to come up with words that start with the letter K. In reality, the answer is B. There are way more words that have K as the 3rd letter, but because they don't come to mind as easily, we've never practiced coming up with words that have a specific letter in the 3rd spot. We've done a lot of practice coming up with words that start with the letter K, though. Because those pop into mind easier, we would get this question wrong because we're trying to use a shortcut based on what pops into mind. Now, there's another shortcut called representativeness heuristic. And I'll just put a star by the slide. There will definitely be questions about both of these on your test and on the AP exam. They love to ask about this. Representative. A representative is a stereotype. It's one person or one idea or one visual image that represents an entire category, okay? Usually if you use this strategy, this shortcut, you're not really using logic. You're just kind of thinking about like what your best guess is. Here's an example. You meet a shy, withdrawn female who is extremely helpful with a passion for details, but little interest in people. Is it more likely that this person is a salesperson or a librarian? Well, what your brain wants to do is use stereotypes. Your brain is probably like, this person has to be a librarian. Well, in reality, it's way more likely that this person is a salesperson. Even if only 10% of salespeople meet this description, that's still 1.8 million people. That still means there's like a 9 times higher chance that this person's a salesperson. Even if only 1% of salespeople meet this description, that still gives you a higher chance that this individual is a salesperson and not a librarian. Your brain doesn't like that though. Your brain wants to use stereotypes, okay, to come up with things rather than math. And that's just a shortcut that your brain uses. Here's a check for understanding that we'll go over in class. Some examples for you. Number 1 and 2 are kind of like what you'll see on the test. Good luck. Pause it, answer them. Okay. Roman numeral 4. Let's talk about creativity, because that's also an aspect of thinking. When you're trying to come up with a unique solution or an idea, so there are different actually stages of creativity. So One stage is called brainstorming, when you maybe just come up with ideas. Okay, you think about all the different parts of the problem. Then we have what's called incubation. To incubate, have you heard that word before? It's like when like a baby bird in an egg is being warmed up. You're trying to help it grow. To incubate is when something is processing. So sometimes your brain works on problems when you're not even thinking about them. That's why sleep is so important. Your brain can solve problems while you are sleeping, okay? When you get close to a solution, we call that intimation. To be intimate means to be close. Intimation, you're getting closer to the solution. Sometimes you have this sudden realization of like, oh, this is what's gonna make sense. This is what's gonna work. And then once you have some sort of an idea, you'll try it out. That's called verification. This is how we solve problems through creativity. I'm gonna give you some little riddles, some brain teasers, some puzzles here. So using these materials, we have a box of matches, some thumbtacks, and a candle. How could you put a candle on a bulletin board? Okay, think about it. Pause it for 30 seconds. Think about how you can use these materials to put something on a bulletin board. The thumbtack doesn't fit through. You can't melt the wax down and use the wax to stick it to the board. That's not going to work. What could you do? Well, be creative. Okay, right? You got to go through these processes, and it might take some time for you to come up with an answer. It would probably be helpful if you actually had the materials, right? But here's a solution. If you don't want to see it, skip ahead. But the solution is you got to think outside the box. Literally, you got to think outside the box. The matches aren't actually going to be helpful for you necessarily, but you can use the match box as a container. You take the match box, empty it out, and then you thumbtack the box into the bulletin board. Boom, you can set your candle up. Okay, that's a pretty cool idea. So why do people have trouble solving that problem? Well, oftentimes one issue is that we approach problems where like every item has a specific purpose. We approach problems a certain way, the same way we traditionally have. Y'all do this in math sometimes. The teacher does a practice question, and then every time there's another question, you try and do it the exact same way. That's you getting set. It's a mental set. It's you kind of getting stuck in one way of thinking, okay? Here's another puzzle for you. How could you arrange 6 matches, or if you just have scrap paper maybe, or off to the side, how could you arrange 6 lines so that those 6 lines, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they form 4 equilateral triangles. This doesn't work because these triangles aren't all equilateral and I've already used up my 6 lines. Can you think of a creative way to arrange these 6 matches to form 4 equilateral triangles or 4 line segments to make 4 equilateral triangles? Think about it. Okay. Well, the way you're thinking about this, normally the problem is that people think in 2D. The answer to this puzzle is you got to build it in 3D. 6 matches, and there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 equilateral triangles here. But people get stuck in their way of thinking. They don't like thinking in new ways. If we're used to thinking a 2-dimensional problem, we're going to have trouble all of a sudden trying to think in 3 dimensions. Okay. So another issue is sometimes with creativity, we get stuck thinking that objects only have one use. So like the previous example with the matchbox, you thought the matchbox was only good for having matches that could light things on fire. In reality, sometimes we have to have what we call divergent thinking. Do y'all remember that book, that movie, Divergent Thinking, thinking in a lot of different ways? Okay. Divergent thinking is when there's lots of answers to a potential puzzle, right? Convergent thinking, to converge, means to end up with just one right answer. Multiple choice tests are about convergent thinking. Creativity is about divergent thinking. There's a famous question, how many uses can you come up with for a paperclip? It's a famous question. There's actually been a book written that's just page after page after page of seeing how creative people can be with what you can use a paperclip for. If any of you tested for the gifted program in elementary school, they might have asked a question like this to have you show how creative you were. That is a measure of your divergent thinking. So 4 checks for understanding for you. We'll go over these in class, but see if you can answer these. Pause it if you need to. Moving on, our last 2 slides here. Thinking flaws, our last 2 sections. Things that can go wrong with our thinking. Sometimes we are overconfident, right? They'll ask people to predict certain events, and how sure are you of that event? People are way too confident in their abilities. Belief bias. We like things that fit our beliefs. And if we get new information that violates our beliefs, we just ignore it. Once we've made up our mind about something, we ignore outside information. Gambler's fallacy. If you flip a coin and it's heads 3 times in a row, and I say, what do you think it's going to be next? You'll probably say tails, because we have trouble with probability. We're not good thinking about odds, right? So we think that everything's going to even out in the end. If we have an athlete who's missed 2 shots in a row, we think, oh, they're due. Surely they'll win the next shot. We have a football team that's lost a couple games. Well, we think they'll win the next one, right? Gambler's fallacy is the trouble we have thinking about probability. Anchoring bias. The first time you hear information about somebody, maybe like the first time you hear like a price, for example, your brain locks into that opinion or price. You emphasize the first piece of information you get about something new, and that sets everything about your thinking going forward. That can be a problem. Stores love this. They tell you this item was $1,000. Now it's only $200. Because they said it was $1,000, your brain gets stuck on that $1,000, and your brain will remember that $1,000 forever. You think, $200 is a great deal. Whereas in reality, that thing might be a $7 item that they're trying to sell to you for $200. But because they presented it as being a $1,000 item, that impacts your thinking. The last one, confirmation bias. When you have an opinion, you try to make every other piece of information fit your opinion. We see all these things in politics sometimes, and like with all the election madness that's been going on, people are overconfident in their polls. Once they decide who they're going to vote for, they ignore any information that might support another candidate. They think that if certain states have gone one color, well, surely this other state will go a different color, right? The first thing you hear, the first tweet you see, or the first post that you read about, you think that must be true, even if there's no evidence for it. And as you get more information, you'll sometimes try and twist that information to make it fit into how you already view the world. These are all flaws with our thinking that impact people, prevent them from making logical decisions. Here, for example, I know there's been a lot of checks for understanding, but this test is going to be a lot of examples where you have to kind of identify what the term is, okay? So pause it, make sure you can answer these. Our last section is something interesting about when we think best and when we can focus best. Do y'all remember when I showed y'all the video of the gorilla? I had y'all watch it during the sensation of perception. Why did some people not see the gorilla? Was it because they were too focused or not focused enough? The problem was they were too focused. There's nothing to write here, just write the title, okay? They were too focused. So they missed the gorilla. They were too focused on the ball, the team in white. Now, if people were told to sit back and watch the video, do you think more of them would see the gorilla or less of them? Probably more of them. It's like when you're more relaxed, you can actually notice more things. That's what Levy did some research on. This is the last slide for you to write, okay? He said that if you decide early on, early selection, if you decide early on, if you choose something to focus on, you will ignore, you will miss other things happening around you. It's just the way your brain works. In contrast, if you're like, there's nothing important right now, everything I can worry about later, I'll decide later on what's important. If you are just chilling, if you're doing something simple, your brain will take in a lot of information going on around you. Let me give you an example. If you're in the cafeteria and you're super focused because you're studying for a test next period, you might miss out on a fight on the other side of the commons because your brain has decided early on what to focus on, and therefore you are so focused, you miss other things happening around you. In contrast, if you're just chilling, hanging out, we call that late selection. You're not doing anything complicated. You notice a lot of things around you because your brain's kind of wants to take everything in. Interesting note, as you get older, you do more of this. Have you ever noticed like your parents, your grandparents, like if they're on their phone or if they're reading a book, they can tune the whole world out, right? Whereas y'all are better at multitasking. You can look at the phone, listen to Mr. Jones, check Snapchat, see what your friend's doing next to you, look out the window. Like you can do a bunch of things all at the same time. because y'all are better at late selection. Your brain is better at multitasking, taking in a lot of stuff, and then deciding on later what's important. So as you get older, you do more early selection. Okay. So if told to casually watch this video for anything strange, 9 out of 10 people will notice the gorilla. If told, hey, you need to watch the ball, about half of people miss the gorilla. So which of these is early load or early selection, and which of these is late load, late selection? Well, remember, early selection, early load is when you are told early on what to focus on. Your brain decides it's only going to pay attention to certain things. So this example here would be example of early load, whereas this would be late selection, late load. Okay. Thanks for watching this on thinking. We'll see you in class. Peace out.